Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Very good. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us this morning for today's program, Pursuing Diversity in the New Economy, a Shared Responsibility. My name is Vero Miles, and on behalf of the Columbus School of Law of the Catholic University of America, again, I want to thank you for joining us for today's very important conversation. I think the question of diversity in our profession is one that we continue to visit time and time again, and it is one that's very important to all of the voices that will be a part of today's program: the corporate community, the law firm community, and the law school community alike. And of course, it's very important for everyone who is interested in building a legal profession that is inclusive and representative. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of the panelists and the moderators, and of course our keynote speaker in advance for agreeing to participate in this program. And I want to offer a very special thank you and acknowledgement to my colleague, Ms. Jessica Hayward, our law school's Director of Employer Relations. I know many of you have had the opportunity and the pleasant experience of working with her. She has coordinated everything with great care, and she has overseen every detail. So I know this is going to be a wonderful event because she does everything wonderfully for us here at Catholic. Thank you, Jessica. The idea for today's program was inspired by the Dean's Leadership Forum on Diversity that my colleague, Dean Linda Ammons at Widener University, started at her school 5 years ago. I had invited Dean Ammons to be with us today, but unfortunately, due to many demands in her schedule, she was not able to join us. But she's been doing this for 5 years for her law school and the legal community in central Pennsylvania. Last spring, I had the opportunity to be one of the members participating in their forum. And as I prepared for that program, I consulted a very compelling study from Columbia University that was led by Professor Conrad Johnson, who was one of our panelists for today's program. And it very carefully documented the very compelling crisis with respect to diversity in our nation's law schools. And at that same conference, I listened to DuPont's General Counsel, Mr. Thomas Sager's impassioned description of how the Call to Action corporate initiative was inspired. And it occurred to me then that other law schools should follow Dean Ammons' example. Because if the goal of diversity within the law school community and the legal profession is to be realized, conversations like that one that occurred that day and the one that we are going to have today must take place everywhere and on a continuum, where constructive ideas and initiatives on ways to enhance and sustain diversity in our profession can be shared and take root. So, let us continue the conversation here today so that it can be followed tomorrow. And with that, I would like to introduce our first panel, the corporate panel, which will be moderated by Ms. Julianne Billaro. Ms. Billaro is a partner in Nelson, Mullins, Riley, and Scarborough's Boston office. She is an experienced litigator in areas of white-collar criminal defense and employment law. She lectures frequently on labor and employment law and criminal defense and civil rights topics. And she has been a contributing author on a wide variety of legal publications. She has been named in Boston Magazine as one of the top 50 lawyers in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I also hope that she'll share with you the importance of mentors. I know she will, and I know there's a very special one in her life that has made her the outstanding litigator that she is today. I had a wonderful conversation with her at dinner when we talked about mentors. And mentors, of course, are critical to everything we do and where we are in our lives. So with that, please welcome Ms. Julianne Billaro.
Thank you, Dean Miles. Now, as I look out over this audience, I'm encouraged by both your numbers and by your diversity. But I also know from my own experience that if this were perhaps a panel on corporate mergers and acquisitions, I'd be likely looking at a very different group. In 1999, the chief legal officers of about 500 major corporations signed a call to action for the legal profession. It was intended to be a mandate for law firms to take immediate and sustained improvement in the area of promoting diversity in the legal profession. When that call to action plateaued, the chief legal officers in October of 2004 renewed their commitment to the call to action. That action was based on what they perceived to be a need to enhance opportunity in the legal profession and their recognition that the legal business interests of clients requiring legal representation that reflected the diversity of the employees, customers, and communities in which we do business. In 2007 and 2008, the economy tanked. So recent surveys have shown that this downturn in the economy, while affecting the legal profession in many ways, has had a disparate negative impact on the diverse lawyers, both in-house counsel and in the legal profession, in law firms, and in the number of applicants, diverse applicants, applying for law school. In this panel, we're going to take a look at the impact of the economic downturn, the impact of the call to action on diversity from a corporate perspective. I am pleased to introduce my panel this morning. You'll first hear from Jacqueline Parker. Jacqueline Parker has served as senior counsel at TD Bank since January of 2010. It's a publicly held company with more than 10,000 employees. Her previous employment includes director and counsel at PayPal, first vice president and senior counsel at Washington Mutual, senior counsel at JP Morgan Chase, senior counsel at Bank One. She was also a business associate and associate in a number of law firms before she went in-house, and she holds an LLM in banking law from Boston University School of Law. We also have with us, and pleased to have with us, Vita Richardson, who has served as executive director of the Minority Corporate Counsel Association since 2001. She's expanded the organization's platform of diversity management issues involving women, the physically challenged, the gay and lesbian lawyers, in addition to lawyers of color. Prior to joining the MCCA, Ms. Richardson was Vice President and Deputy General Counsel to the Association of Corporate Counsel. She's a graduate of the University of Maryland School of Law and has been recognized for diversity leadership by a number of organizations. And finally, we have with us Mr. Ernest Tuckett. Mr. Tuckett currently serves as commercial counsel supporting DuPont's crop protection business platform. Earlier, he served for 5 years as labor and employment counsel for DuPont's plant sites and business platforms in the U.S. Mr. Tuckett was also the 2009-2010 chair of the DuPont Minority Counsel Network, and he's a project coordinator for DuPont's Legal Street Law Pipeline Diversity Project. For some reason, Nelson, Mullins, Riley, and Scarborough saw fit to appoint me as the chair of the firm-wide diversity committee. I took over the position in January of this year, and I've just been astonished by the challenges that increasing the numbers of diverse law firm associates, laterals, partners presents for both Nelson Mullins, Riley, and Scarborough, and I'm sure for other colleagues in my profession. Dean Miles mentioned a mentoring issue. Mentoring is one of my major initiatives this year at Nelson Mullins. And the reason for that is that I realized very early on as a young lawyer how important mentoring was to me in my profession. My mentor was my father. He is a very well-known, prominent criminal defense attorney in the Boston area. And I know that without my father's support, I would not be where I am today. And I know from the experience of our diverse associates at Nelson Mullins, Riley, and Scarborough that they wouldn't be where they are today if they didn't have the support of mentors within the firm. At this point, I'm going to turn the program over to Ms. Parker.
Thank you. Perhaps it's best at this point to talk about the corporation, and I can give you some background about TD and our interest in diversity. Diversity is very important to TD Bank. As many of you might know, TD, America's most convenient bank. We are present here, too. So I am in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and we actually are Canadian-owned. Some of you may or may not know that. The TD stands for Toronto Dominion Bank Financial Group in Canada. And so our call to action actually stems from the general counsels that signed on to that initiative in Canada. And that is something that has been important to the bank. It's actually been signed on now for the past 2 years, but it's certainly been an important issue for the bank for years now. Over the past year I've been there, I've certainly seen much growth. And when I guess I speak about diversity at the bank, I just hope you know, as much as I do care very much about lawyers and how we grow it well, it's also actually quite broad because many of the lawyers in our bank actually serve in very senior positions, actually in compliance. And so it's not just been within given opportunities of growth to people within TD Bank in the legal department, but also in our compliance departments, our risk departments, our audit departments, where you'll find people, again, quite seasoned who have grown with the bank and being promoted to very senior levels in the bank. It's very important in terms of our hiring initiatives. So again, within the legal department, within the bank of itself, the bank knows that our clients are very diverse. As you all know, the population of this country is changing. As the demographic shifts, we have to be very cognizant of that and realize when we talk to our clients, when we respond to issues, who we're talking to. So it's something that, again, is a very broad level. In terms of the legal department, again, we do report up to Canada. And within our our Cherry Hill, we actually have several departments. Our Cherry Hill office, our Portland, Maine office, and as we continue to grow and hopefully acquire Chrysler's legal department as well in the next month, we are growing by acquisition. We're also growing just by the growth of our size and the growth of our products and services. So as we talk about the economic downturn, for us it's actually, we've been doing very well as a bank, but we've also, in the process of acquiring, the people who we are acquiring are coming from other institutions as well, and we integrate them into our legal department. And again, diversity is one of the issues we talk about. It's important to lawyers when we hire counsel. It's important in terms of when we hire we do work with a group of lawyers, and many of you might be familiar with this RFP process where you actually have a supplier list, and so that supplier list, again, is important to us to look at diversity and those issues as well. So I look forward to talking to you more, but again, just wanted to give you an overview of the bank, and the diversity issues are important to us in legal, but also in hiring and retention and promotion throughout the bank.
Thank you, Jackie. Vita, could you just give us a brief overview from your perspective?
Of MCCA?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. It's great to be here. MCCA is a 501c3 nonprofit association. It was founded in 1997 with one mission, which is advancing diversity in the legal profession. I've been executive director since 2001. So for exactly a decade, or a little more than a decade, my sole focus has been looking at the legal profession, specifically the sectors of corporations and the law firms that they retain, and thinking about the ways to impart best practices, collect knowledge and information, and tools and resources that will enable that sector of the legal profession to lead the way with respect to diversity. Before I came to MCCA, I used to be a securities lawyer, so I'm used to thinking about organizations in terms of business lines. So MCCA has 3 business lines. We're in research and education. We're in publishing. We publish diversity in the Bar magazine. It has a circulation base of about 33,000 in-house counsel. throughout the United States and up north into Canada. And our third line of business is we host networking events around the country. Many of you may be familiar with MCCA's awards. We give an Employer of Choice Award that recognizes top corporations that are leaders with respect to diversity. And we also present our Thomas L. Sager Award that's actually named for the General Counsel of DuPont, who has long been a leader with respect to diversity and was a part of MCCA's founding board. And that Sager Award is given to law firms that distinguish themselves in their region with respect to diversity programs and results. And I guess from my vantage point, and looking at how diversity has caught fire as an issue, I would offer this in the way of a benchmark. When I first started at MCCA in 2001, I used to have to pick up the phone and beg people to listen to me or invite myself. Can I come out and speak to you about diversity in the legal profession? And that's how, I guess, MCCA and early knowledge about diversity started to be shared. To this point in time when there are so many forums and opportunities to talk about diversity and so many organizations that have embraced it, maybe not necessarily solve the issues, but embraced it as a commitment, that I'm very pleased to see the advancements that have been made over the last decade.
Mr. Tucker, could you give us a brief overview of DuPont's perspective on diversity?
Good morning, everyone. DuPont is a 207-year-old science company. I had to do the math real quick. Founded back in the early 1800s as a science company to provide gunpowder to the U.S. military. The French had a pretty good, a much better gunpowder formula, and so Thomas Jefferson, the DuPont brothers, came to Delaware, which is why we're in Wilmington, Delaware. Somehow they ended up in Delaware. I think the river gave them a good something about that. But anyway, fast forward 200 years. We are a science company. Our tagline that you'll see in many cases, the miracles of science. And in this, in our company really in this generation of itself is really focused on coming up with solutions to many of the world's problems in the areas of energy, agriculture, and safety and protection. Most people have heard of DuPont, and a lot of my friends still call us a paint company. Well, we do make some paint, but that's one of our shrinking, auto paint is one of our shrinking businesses. We're probably more well known for Kevlar, the bulletproof material, for Tyvek, the housing wrap and the building wrap you see, as well as we make I support our crop protection business. We make a lot of pesticides and herbicides to help the goal of helping to increase the yields of the food supplies around the world. And then, of course, in alternative energy, we're involved in the biofuels area as well. In DuPont Legal, as Vita pointed out, we have a great leader, Tom Sager, who followed on the heels of another great leader, Stacy Mobley, who many of you may know in the room. And these two gentlemen, and Tom in particular, have been pioneers in the area of diversity in the sense that it's become something that is everyone in the profession needs to deal with now. As Vita was saying, you know, I started out at a firm 15 years ago, Aaron Fox, here in D.C., and there was discussion of diversity, but you could probably count on one hand the number of firms that actually had someone at the firm whose job it was to focus on diversity. I sat through 3 formations of diversity committees in my 10 years or so at my firm, and each time we progressed a bit, but it always seemed like my friends would have the same experience at all their firms, that we were kind of starting over a lot. Get a nice flow of associates in, do a great job recruiting, and then they would leave by attrition. One of the things that DuPont has done, and a lot of other companies have done, is we've focused on creating a core group of law firms that represent us, and in that process have used diversity as one of the key factors in determining whether or not a firm that fits all of our other needs would win the competition, at least going back when they had the competition for who would be on the list, probably 13 years ago or more. to decide which firms would make the cut. And diversity is used as not only a tool for choosing law firms, and it's not just diversity in numbers, it's diversity, your commitment to diversity. What are you doing to ensure that diversity in your firm didn't just happen by accident and that it won't just go away because of a lack of attention? So the commitment to diversity, the effort around diversity, the infrastructures you build in your firm, and the effort and money and energy you put behind it, as well as recruiting, as well as training and developing your lawyers. Every year we have a benchmark survey that every firm has to fill out, and this thing is large. Jackie can tell you it's huge, so it's got a lot of sections in it. But there is a very significant section of the benchmarking survey where there are some very detailed questions asked of our law firms every year as to what are your accomplishments around the area of diversity. It goes beyond just how many do you have, how many have made partner of each different ethnic group and gender, as well as sexual orientation. But it also asks questions specifically about our work and how many hours, what percentages and number of hours and number of billings that your firm received from DuPont were staffed by diverse associates and partners. So there's a lot of measuring going on, and DuPont, being a science company, believes, as my boss Hinton Lucas always says, whatever gets measured is what gets done. And we believe that just asking the question alone gets us a long way along the road of keeping our firms accountable. And then, of course, there's follow-up in terms of interviews and meetings with the firms to discuss all aspects of the benchmarking survey, everything from the use of alternative fee arrangements to billing rates to diversity as well. So it's part of the business discussion. It's not an afterthought. It's part of the discussion, and it's part of the factors. We have networks within. You heard when part of my bio was being read about the Minority Council Network. We have the DuPont Minority Council Network and the DuPont Women Lawyers Network, made up of DuPont lawyers who are minorities in one case and women in the other, and the lawyers from our law firms that fit those same groups. And every year there's a conference for each of these groups, whether it's in town or our local headquarters or whether it's on the road, to bring those lawyers together to discuss issues around diversity, to talk about professional development. So there's a lot of energy, a lot of effort, and frankly a lot of resources that our general counsel and the leadership team have put to bear on the issue. And as you can see, it's not just focused on us. It's mainly, in a lot of ways, focused also on our firms and figuring out ways to give our firms resources to help them do what it is we're mandating that they do, which is to have a commitment to diversity. So something such as the minority job fairs that we run in 4 different cities, Chicago, LA, Houston, and Wilmington, Delaware. We provide a platform for firms to have another resource to go out and find talented minority students. And a number of folks have been hired who are still at our firms today. We have a couple of success stories. One of my good friends, Dawn Tesano, down in Houston, is made partner. She was hired out of our job fair, and a couple of years ago made partner at her firm, Happy Weber, down in Texas. And there's a couple of other stories just like that, as well as people all in between. So we're excited about the progress, but we always know, and I know I do personally, after spending so many years at a firm, that there's always so much more work to be done. You need to look no further than the statistics before and after the recession to see that many of our groups are still in the single digits. Women are still in the low double digits when it comes to leadership, when it comes to positions of power. So this is not a time to get complacent. And certainly at DuPont and in all of the companies that are part of the call to action in the Leadership Council on Legal Diversity like we are, it's time to really continue to turn the heat up and to make sure that everyone in the profession understands that we as clients and as corporations care. And hopefully that will help those of you who are at law firms get your partnership and your leadership to care as well.
Vita, it's clear that DuPont leads by example in this area, and there are other companies that are equally committed to diversity as DuPont is. But my question for you is, do you believe that the call to action has had the desired effect in promoting diversity in legal counsel offices inside corporations?
In part, yes, and in part, no.
In what way, yes?
In part, yes, because I think it sends a strong statement about the commitment of corporate America with respect to diversity. I know that each of the corporations that signed on to the call to action thought very carefully about doing so, and then, once signed on, started thinking very carefully about the programs and the initiatives that they would lead and embark upon in order to further diversity goals. But the flip side is that one of my disappointments with respect to the call to action is that the call to action ended with a statement that we will end or limit our relationships with firms that cobbled together, and paraphrasing it, that didn't meet our expectations with respect to diversity. And so I think that part of the statement is some that many corporations have followed through and done well. Corporations like DuPont, who make diversity a part of their selection criteria and who are not afraid to move business or to not invite firms, to even submit for business based upon diversity performance. But one of the disappointing things is that, I've heard a number of general counsel who have signed the call to action who really haven't followed through in the way that I think we all hoped and expected that they would with respect to that commitment. And so from that perspective, there are some general counsel, in terms of the way they implemented and acted, who have been a disappointment. I won't call names, but they have been a disappointment.
Well, does anyone send them a questionnaire to answer to see how they're doing in terms of meeting their diversity goals?
I don't know that it's necessary, to send them a questionnaire, because some have been quite vocal as they speak about the fact that they haven't followed through. So it's recorded and on a record at various locations where they may have been posed that question quite directly. I will say that MCCA, towards the end of this last year, we embarked on a huge survey of corporate diversity, and did so in partnership with the NALP Foundation, and we partnered with the organization that I'll lead as of July 1st, the Association of Corporate Counsel, and disseminated a diversity survey that included questions about whether corporate counsel have moved business or not invited to the party to be considered for business firms that failed to meet diversity expectations or could not deliver a diverse team. And that survey was, I think results for the survey were submitted up through mid-February. And so close to 800 unique law departments from throughout the U.S. completed the survey. And I have calls coming up where we're going to start to do early analysis of the data. So we'll be in a position before I depart from MCCA at the end of June to know who's been following through and who hasn't. Now, one thing we did offer to the corporations to ensure candor is that we wouldn't publish, their names and their results. So our report will be produced in an aggregate, and we will provide each corporation an individual benchmarking report so they can see how they're doing, measured against their industry peers, if sufficient numbers submitted, or against law departments of their size or law departments with headquarters in their geographic region. So we will very soon be able to see, in general, if corporate America is following through with their diversity commitments.
Ms. Parker, do you believe that the call to action has had a positive impact on the way GCs are hiring in-house?
I do believe so. I think that, although it's hard to say, I actually, my first in-house job was in 2003, and so I guess when I go back to that time, it's hard to really compare. I guess when I look back to that time to now, it's very evident to me how diverse internal law departments are. I think I've seen probably the greatest impact on law firms and how they promote themselves to corporations for business. And that to me has been pretty evident in terms of who they send to pitch work and who calls you. But certainly the diversity of a law firm, the corporate law department, I guess for my bank, and I guess part of it is because we're so heavily regulated, a lot of opportunities for hiring come from law firms. So that's really where we seek to hire most of our people, and certainly from other corporations, from government entities. And so we're really picking up whatever opportunities people had to be trained before they came to us. I can't even think of anyone who's hired directly by the bank who just came out of law school. So as people get hired, really, and so I can certainly speak to myself, who, because I certainly had an opportunity to focus on banking law at a law firm, and I was mentored, and I was given the chance to take on challenging assignments, and as of course I left the firm to go to an in-house job, I was able to certainly sell that aspect. But I don't know, and I guess in two parts of it, I guess one part of it in terms of who we hire now, I think we certainly are very cognizant in thinking about diversity. We actually have our HR staff intentionally goes to certain organizations and asks for diverse pool of candidates, because as you put things out on websites, as you know, things like Career Builder and Monster, you get what you get, but it's also very important to solicit diverse candidates from other organizations as well. Then there's the other aspect of, in terms of what knowledge do they have, and so where I think I've certainly seen great candidates over the past year as we've hired. A lot of our hiring has been really from acquisition, and in the past year I believe we picked up 3 different banks. And so as we grow, we're really growing from other organizations and we get what they get. And as we've not really created new positions, although I truly hope every day that we will, that we will hire more, because I feel the work mass and the Dodd-Frank Act has not changed anything in a very positive way for my Knights. So we have lots of work to do, and again, when you think about who you hire, when you think about the impacts of the recession and who's out there, they're general counsels from large organizations who are looking for work. And not all of them are diverse in the sense of the factors that we're looking to, but you're going to hire people who have that experience, and certainly it may not necessarily be a desire to not be diverse, but the reality is, as we're picking up organizations, people with 30 years of experience, it really, when you look back to the fact that there was no call to action then, your diverse pool wasn't there. So I would absolutely say when I look at the younger lawyers and the lawyers with under 20 years of experience, I think some of that probably does stem from the fact that firms were hiring and thinking about diversity, but certainly 30 years or more, I don't know, I certainly think there's a difference.
Mr. Tucker, if you could improve on the call to action, how would you do that?
I think I would jump right in to where Vita started, Vita ended. I've publicly said on a few occasions, when huge crowds or anything, but publicly said that I think that I really envision a world where more corporations would actually use sticks as much as they use carrots. And there's a lot of reasons, business reasons, to think carefully about using sticks, what sticks you use, how often you use them, and how hard you swing them. But because you try to form partnerships with your firms, and you don't want to make enemies out of the people you're having a partnership with, but at the same time, there's a time and a place for calling someone to the carpet on their non-performance. If diversity is one of the 4 pillars on which you built your decision to hire the firm, then pull the pillar out. And if they, and they ought to fall at that point. And there ought to be a change. And until there's a change, there's always going to be free riders in any system. And you've got some folks busting their hump, and then you have others who have an excuse every few years. Sometimes legitimate excuses. There is such a thing. You may have a firm in an office in a city where there's just no diversity, and you got to draw people from other places. We have a few firms that's clearly the case, and they do what they can to support diversity initiatives in general. But if you're sitting in the middle of California, in the middle of D.C., and you're just not performing, it's not a matter of saying you're a bad actor. It's just a matter of saying we have another option. And I have said this to some of our firms. I said, you guys better be glad I'm not some superstar who's going to take over this legal department, because if I had my way, I'd say certain things. I like to say those things and make them laugh before I say what I really mean. And, because the reality is there are pockets within even a good system like ours where you still have a few folks, and I won't name names either, where you look at the numbers. I was chair of the Minority Council. We get lists of all the diverse attorneys, and there was one year where there was a firm that didn't have anybody. And I went, they fixed it. I think they lost a few people. Something happened. It wasn't a huge firm, but they were big enough that nobody. That just kind of struck me. And it was raised and dealt with. But I think that talking to friends who are in-house, when I said it in a panel, and I was on the panel with 3 other in-house people, all of them it was almost like an amen chorus. Use the sticks. That's where I think it could be improved upon, and I think the Leadership Council on Legal Diversity has made stronger statements about using sticks, but again, they're statements until they're actually, as Rita was saying, they're statements until they're actually put into action. So that's what I would personally improve upon. But I think the concept is great. It's really, sitting at a firm for all those years, I know it's the only thing that got some of our partners, not all, some of our partners to even think about the makeup of their team, was the fact that Rick Palmore, Tom Sager, Michelle Coleman-Mays, all these folks were saying, we care about that, and what are you doing about it? They look like fools not doing something about it. So that helped. I think the construct is great, but every piece of it should be used to the fullest.
Ms. Richardson, how would you improve upon the call to action?
I think the call to action, the statement of it is fine. I think it's the implementation that needs improvement, and that also now the call to action has morphed. Technically, the call to action, I don't think, as a document exists any longer. It's been superseded by a new document that includes commitments that are being made by corporations and by law firms, and it's morphed into a membership association now. How would I improve upon that? I would have some standards or requirements for admission. I don't think that perhaps people should just pay a fee and automatically participate. Perhaps there should be some standards or requirements, some self-policing of those who signed on. I must say, I'm not sure if the call to action still includes the statement about we will end or limit. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Hopefully it does, because I think it was that statement that caused people in the legal community to stand up and take notice. And to the extent it goes away and isn't replaced with something equally as strong, I think we lose an essential tool that had up to that point caught the attention of managing partners of major firms and compelled them to appoint diversity committees and chief diversity officers and fund programs and initiatives that would make things better.
The last sentence of the call to action posted in October of 2004 reads as follows: we further intend to end or limit our relationships with firms whose performance consistently evidences a lack of meaningful interest in being diverse.
Yes.
Ms. Parker, are you aware of any instances where relationships have been terminated with law firms as a result of their lack of commitment to diversity?
I'm not personally aware of any. I know I've actually talked with several of my colleagues prior to coming here just to get a better perspective of their thoughts. And for TD, it is a 2-year, we're more recent signatory for the Canadian. So we're actually still working on some of the elements that I know DuPont is very far ahead on, and trying to figure out just tracking of who's working on our matters, building that into a database so that we can actually monitor those issues. And so to the extent that we're actually dealing with what are we going to do when we find out they're not doing it, that's a challenge. I will tell you that one of my greatest challenges still remains working with different firms who actually have fabulous diversity programs and fabulous diversity initiatives. I've been able to track people who I've known through the American Bar Association who've just done fabulously, but then they don't work on banking. And so when you find that there are issues where people they're not experts, I'm not necessarily in the line of trying to make people love banking, although I have to tell you it's a great field. But anyway, I think, the reality is it's very much, I like to encourage the people I work with towards their recruiting. I certainly like to ask them about, do you have a summer associate that's working on this matter and things of that sort. But it's one of those fields that, for some reason, and I can't actually name any, but I know from my initial start in trying to move up in the organization and get exposure, it's just been a little slower. And I don't know if maybe on the science side, maybe intellectual property might be a similar world of DuPont, but certainly when it comes to certain areas, certain specialties. So again, we have great firms that I work with. Yes, some of them have even more diversity on their hiring teams that we work with on projects, and some don't. But then, again, it's that challenge of what do you do with those firms. So I think we're still working through those and trying to sort that out.
I want to jump in a minute because we start off, and Jacqueline in particular, I agree with you that finance and banking are areas where you just don't have a robust pipeline and pool. That's why I want to also offer another perspective on Dodd-Frank, which is one that I'm really bullish on, and we'll be featuring an interview of Congresswoman Maxine Waters in the next issue of our magazine to commend her for some of the great work that she did on Dodd-Frank, which was to include provisions that compel major federal agencies that in some way accepted some of the TARP money or managed the TARP money to have offices of diversity and inclusion to make sure that more minorities and women are participating in the financial sector. And I am hopeful that once these offices get staffed and they get underway and going, there are challenges now with the staffing because of what's going on in the government in terms of the economy and federal budgets. But I'm hopeful that that will boost opportunities so that you will see a much richer pipeline.
I agree. Thank you. And actually, one of the, if you don't mind me adding to that, one of the, at least I'm very active with the American Bar Association section of business law, and we had 4 counsel and legal education and opportunity scholars at our meeting last year. And one of the things I said to them was, thanks to Dodd-Frank, that you know it's coming, and especially for those of you who might be law students here and hopefully encouraged by banking, but to the extent that you think about things like that, when you have a brand new law in place and no one understands it, and you have the opportunity to research it and talk about it in a way that no one has a chance. I mean, honestly, I do try to do my job, but it's over 2,000 pages. And so when you're trying to keep up with everything around you and you have someone with a fresh face come in and actually knows this information, written an article, and I mean, for us right now, just thinking about law summer clerks for the first time who actually might be able to help us more in Dodd-Frank in a way we haven't had a chance to because of that expertise. So I just, you don't mind, but I just wanted to at least market, not banking as much, but perhaps just the opportunities for growth. And there's no senior partner out there, I think, who's any necessarily more knowledgeable than Dodd-Frank. If you can dig into it with the same amount of time and energy, everyone is learning this at the same time. No one knows what's going to happen.
Vida, are you aware of any instances where corporations have terminated their relationships with law firms as a result of their lack of commitment to diversity?
Yes, lots of them. Lots of them. From my vantage point at MCCA, I have the pleasure of being invited into different corporate diversity council meetings fairly frequently. And also I've seen the after effects of firms that have been dismissed. I can't call the name of this particular general counsel, but he had been very vocal about his stance on diversity and was embarrassed to find at one point that one of the firms that they used a lot for corporate services and acquisitions transactions had dismissed all of the minority associates or minority senior associates that were a part of what had been his team. And when he got wind of it, he fired the firm and put the book of business up for grabs. And in fact, he called me to ask for suggestions of firms that have very diverse corporate departments. And, so I can tell you, I know that it happens. I feel that it's not my place at MCCA to call their names because that is for them to share their story. But there are a good number of corporations many who've signed the call to action, including for companies that haven't signed the call to action, that have just behaved consistently with the call to action values.
Mr. Tucker, have you noticed that the economic downturn has had a particularly negative impact on diverse hiring or retention?
In the aggregate, when we did some measuring within our firms, the percentages didn't drastically change. And we did some, it was really high-level measuring, so we didn't drill. But I know way too many people at our firms and other firms that I get all of the war stories from the ground. One particular firm, multi-city firm, a couple of friends of mine were laid off from the firm, and something like 25% of the layoffs in one of their offices were African American associates, not minority associates. I didn't count that. African American associates, 25%. And I can tell you they have a single-digit percentage for black associates, black lawyers at the firm. You hear about it happening where the people who happen to be on the fringe, who are going to get mowed down by the weed whacker, happen to be more likely than not, or happen to include a much larger group of minority associates.
You are entirely right. There were statistics that were released by American Lawyer magazine after diversity surveys that they had conducted, where they found that on average, law firms shed about 6% of all associates because of the weaknesses in the economy. But for African Americans, that number climbed to 13%. So 6% on average, 13% for African Americans. I remember the number for Asian Americans was about 10%. And for Hispanics, the number was somewhere between 10 and 13. I can't remember exactly. But what we saw with respect to associates of color and attorneys of color in firms is they were being dismissed because of the economy in double-digit percentages, whereas the overall percentage of the firm was only 6%, which then tells us that for majority associates, the number had to have been below in order for it to balance at about 6. Yeah. And I think that's shameful.
And I think what you find is the business case, ever since I got out of law school, the business case has become way more prominent than, for good reason. I mean, it's the way the market works, so nobody's quibbling with that. But you don't, this gives me a chance to jump on the soapbox I love, you don't achieve diversity in a law firm environment in particular, and a corporate one too for that matter, by accident. There's hardly anybody who remains at a law firm beyond the 6, 7, 8 year associate track before they burn out or get kicked out by accident, completely by accident. Now there's some who luck up on a book of business one day when they were about to leave and they stay. But most people, there's a good bit of a plan on their part, and some people, not the whole firm, but at least some people within the firm, to make sure that they're getting certain things along the way. Now, I'm not speaking from perspective of, I've been sitting in the ivory tower of in-house. I sat through a firm where I've read plenty, I shouldn't have seen them, but I read plenty of our severance agreements for friends who shut my door and asked me confidentially to make sure they weren't signing something that they shouldn't be signing. So I know who left by and large on their own, and I know who left by and large with some help. So firms are built on models of attrition, and if they don't get the attrition they need to support the business model, it only makes sense that they have to force some of it. So you're working against a stacked deck when you talk about retention. When you talk about retention of anyone, you're working against a stacked deck because you have a model that's built on attrition. So if you have a stacked deck already, you have a small pool already of what you're trying to retain, how else are you going to do it unless you do it on purpose? Sounds like I'm talking about reverse discrimination, maybe, some people would say. But in reality, it's just basically factoring in certain criteria of associates and lawyers that are underrepresented when you start making decisions about who you're going to champion. One of the questions I started asking our firms, and I started asking the associates, the minority associates first, so they would have a heads up on it. Take a look at your firm, I said, and figure out where the partners are being made. Because not every firm makes partners in the business group. Not every firm makes partners in the litigation group. Some have healthcare practices that are booming. Others have antitrust practices that are booming. Where are the partners being made in your firm? If you're flexible, find one of those groups. If you're not flexible, find a firm that makes partners. Well, this is when they could move. They can't move now, but when they could move, find a firm that makes partners in your practice area. I was in the employment and litigation group of my firm. They hadn't made a partner in employment for a long time. Other firms, they were making partners every day. So every year, excuse me. So I think you've got to think about that. And when you're trying to retain your associates, guiding them, as you were talking about with both of you were talking about with the Frank Dodd Act. You've got a student coming out of law school. I was 24. I hadn't even heard of a tort when I got to law school, so I want to litigate. Why? Because I would like Matlock. That's why. If you had said, no, you like healthcare law, I would have said, okay, I like healthcare law. Because you're going to make partner doing that here, not doing that here. You know, there's ways that you can make sure that your associates of color, your women, coming in, understand here's a path to have your business case. All of this sink or swim stuff is really a falsehood. It's a false, what's the right word? It's a false setup. It doesn't really exist. They don't just throw people in a barrel and see who swims to the top, and then whoever stays is the best. Somebody champions people. Because the best leave, and sometimes the best get kicked out too. Because they don't have a business case when you're an 8th-year associate billing at $380 an hour, and I can't put you on this matter because I need a junior associate. It's a business. So if you're going to retain somebody, they have to have the business case. And they don't get it by accident. And when you have people who control business, who decide that they're going to do it on purpose, then it'll happen. Until they decide, then you have your hit or miss cases where somebody's cousin becomes the general counsel of such and such, and they happen to fall into a book of business, and then they drag him or her in and say, look at our diversity success. You didn't do it. Because they'll walk out tomorrow with that business, and you won't have anything to say about it. So the point really is, it's got to be done on purpose. That's my wording. It's got to be done with a purpose in mind, because you're working against a stacked deck. And I said this sitting in diversity committees from the time I was a mid-level associate 10 years ago to the time I left the firm, and since I've left, to all firms. There's got to be some purpose behind it. So if your real estate group or your corporate transactional group is the group that's really the group that's making the partners, and you know you've got partners in that group that are running women out of it, and you don't do anything about it, then the money they're making means more to you than the diversity. It's just a fact. So that's something that we ought to dial into our calculus when we look at hiring you. That's just sort of the bullish talking I can do sitting on a panel, because I'm not running anything. But I think the reality is, you know, what I said about doing it on purpose, it has to be. And the firms that have gotten it in their head, and the partners who have the power, like your father and like the other lawyers that you mentioned at dinner last night, she mentioned how some of the lawyers, like her dad, brought along women into the criminal bar. And she looked back and realized that other women who were her contemporaries had the same experience as she did with her dad, but they had it with other men, and including her dad. And that struck me when you said it last night, because these men realized these are some sharp women who can do this job, and I need to make sure they get championed. And until they start doing that in larger numbers, you're not going to. You can see the difference between the firms that have the success and that don't. And you talk to those partners there; they'll tell you, I was championed by these folks. So that's sort of the. That to me, it really is the ball game when it comes down to law firms. I don't know that you really need a whole lot of programs all the time. They help. but you really have to have your power brokers, not just your management team, because a lot of them don't have business, that's why they're on the management team. The people who actually control the business at your firm, who actually are invested in that. And how do you get them to do it? Maybe it's dragging Rick Palmore or Tom Seger or Michelle Coleman Mays or whoever into your office and telling them we really give a damn about this.
Ms. Parker, there are a lot of really good, qualified lawyers out in the marketplace looking for work. You mentioned in your opening that there have not been a lot of openings at TD Bank, not a lot of new hirings. But have you seen an impact on diversity hiring as a result of the fact that sheer competition for the limited number of spaces available exists now in the workplace?
In particular, TD Bank or in general?
In general, or TD Bank.
Sure. I mean, I think actually I've seen a mix of things that, I mean, I guess I probably can speak more to banking than anything else. And just to premise that with the fact that I was at Washington Mutual, so I actually went through a downturn myself and went through a significant change in competition with former colleagues. And actually where I was laid off, actually, unfortunately, wasn't from Washington Mutual, it was from PayPal. And the reality is that as all those changes happen, there are a lot of great people in the marketplace. But as I looked around at the candidates and even the positions that I was going for, many of them were very junior, and that was just the reality of survival. So I think that in the end, diversity has made a difference in terms of where I see the pipeline coming in. But where I guess where I perhaps am not seeing it still is in terms of people in the very first or second year level, and not to jump too much back to the last question, but when you look at law firms and in terms of retention of diversity or growth of diversity, I've seen a lot of diversity more recently hired in a very senior level in terms of partners who are former general counsel, maybe, or some kind of senior level in the government, but not in terms of the more junior first or second year approach. So in my own experience looking for a job, I don't know whether or not many places were looking for my diversity or anyone else's, but the reality is that when you're interviewing for a job with just 3 years of experience and you have over 15, you know, I remember asking one time for a government position, what's the average person going through it here? Because I was amazed to get called for it, and they said 12. So, you know, it's really difficult, and they have a lot of choices to make, and whether, again, what the final decision is on diversity, I think it's important when what they're looking at, but I don't know that I can say that it had made much of a difference with all the choices they had. I think if I could add to the fact that TD's legal department doesn't hire, or at least hasn't hired right now recently, but actually on the compliance side and the other areas of the bank, and actually I work with colleagues in law who are in my legal department actually who are former compliance people. So where there has been opportunities for diversity, I've seen it through almost like different channels. And while I haven't worked with anyone yet from audit who's moved into legal, the reality is that that's where I think I've seen a lot of change, and certainly within my organization over the past 2 years where the message has become stronger and stronger, and actually is being pushed on an executive level down, similar to how I think MCCA and DuPont have worked well to make it work. You know, no one ever said that they went to the junior level people at the law departments and asked them to make this statement. It had to come from the top down. And the president of the bank has made that message clear in statements. Actually, at Clark, the president of TD Bank Financial Group, we just had Women in Leadership Day just a couple weeks ago, and came out to a channel in Canada and spoke openly about his approach to diversity and recognizing, you know, essentially it's everyone, but why, you know, it really shouldn't be any difference in who you are. And I think it's almost as though with law, for whatever reason, I don't know why there's always been this direction of, it's almost like what you get approach. For, you know, when you look back 30 years, and then finally there was an approach to realize, you know, it's actually good to have a diversity of thought, whether it's disabilities or gay lesbians or minorities. And I think finally there was this push and initiative, and it seems like, as again was mentioned, it got let go. So I'd like to believe that we're moving forward despite the economy. But the reality is I think the impact's been pretty hard now, and I don't know. I worry for what's ahead. If hopefully, again, if the government can pick up some banking people for us and then train them, and then they can move in. But it's hard.
Mr. Tucker, you mentioned the challenges with attrition, losing diverse associates and lawyers once you're able to recruit them and bring them in. But what do you see as the single greatest impediment to the promotion and advancement of diverse attorneys?
I think at bottom I think it goes back to the business case within the firm and the respect within the firm that you are someone that should be kept and that should be part of the taking care of the institutional clients. I think one of the ways, I think that a lot of associates that we're trying to reach, it's changing as people are second and third generation now, college and graduates and all, it may be changing. But a lot of our minority associates in particular come in with a lack of knowledge on how the process works and how the game is played on that real subtle level. And that's where your champions and your, not just mentors, but people who really make an investment in your career really come in. Because there are a lot of intangible things you will never figure out until it's too late. So I'm speaking a little, my experience is a little dated in terms of my personal experience, 5 years out of a firm, but talking to other friends there, I think that not really knowing how to market when the time is right, because there's no magic number as to when you need to start bringing business in. Not knowing how to get connected and plugged into the right clients, to the extent there's a chance for developing business from pre-existing clients. And then, sometimes not even getting the right levels of experience within the firm. I still find that a lot of associates that I speak to now are still having some of the same issues that some of my friends had and my peers had, and I had even at times. It's figuring out how to get plugged in and stay plugged in. And so if you're in that kind of an environment, the numbers suggest that a lot of women in particular are choosing to leave for other opportunities, but I submit that if there were better, if the firms had showed more of an initiative to having a plan to keep them around, as opposed to this falsehood of sink or swim, that everybody's just kind of swimming around and whoever doesn't drown is fine. If that person felt like the firm had a bit of a plan for them, as well as their plan for themselves, I suggest that a lot more people would stay a little longer, or a lot longer. So I think the champion aspect, but also the feeling of a plan of some kind to help build their skill set as they go along would be very, very helpful. Because I still find a lot of associates feel like they're on their own. They're at 300, 400. Even nowadays, it's more like 700 to 1,000. A big firm in my day was 300. And they feel alone. And it's mind-boggling. You could be in an organization that big and feel by yourself.
Ms. Richardson, do you think that the corporate counsel, I'll call them firms, because really, a lot of the legal counsel departments in large corporations are really smaller law firms. But do you think they do a better job of retaining and promoting diverse legal talent than law firms in the private sector do? Or do you think they're facing basically the same challenges?
I believe that they face challenges. If I just, look at the numbers, and when I visit a lot of the law departments that are active within MCCA, I see significantly more people of diverse backgrounds, progressing up the ladder. If I consider also that I would say the majority of diverse counsel that I meet in-house are there because they decided to leave law firms because they didn't like the experience there. I think that also speaks to something that the corporations have done well to be able to capture this talent. Now I want to pick up on an analogy, just offer an analogy to what Ernest was talking about the concept of sink or swim. I think about it this way, that there is, within every organization, people tend to gravitate to people who they perceive as like them. It's a concept called in-group favoritism. So if you're the in-group or you're in the majority position, it's a natural thing for people to gravitate to people who are like them. And how that translates when it's applied to diverse attorneys, when you think about the concept of sink or swim, is that everybody's thrown into the pool. You have to sink, you will sink or you have to swim. I think everybody starts off trying to swim fast to avoid sinking, because everyone's successful, everybody wants to get to the other side of the pool. But I think what tends to happen is that certain people, because of in-group favoritism dynamics, start off swimming, and at some point when their arms may falter or they may get a little tired, there's a life jacket that encircles them. So they're able to make it to the end of the pool. The problem with diverse attorneys is that they have all the capabilities and the qualifications to make it to the end of the pool, but when their arms get tired, they don't have the same life jackets and support and interest in them, so they sink. Some of them rise up, paddle, get to the side of the pool, and say, forget it, I'm going someplace else, where they'll offer me a life jacket, some support, and where I feel welcome. And that's exactly what's happening to me in law firms. Some people are getting encapsulated by a life jacket that helps them, whereas others don't get that support, and they get tired and sink to the bottom, or they get tired and say, forget this pool, I can take my talent someplace else.
And if I can add one quick thing, I love that analogy. One quick thing is we both will readily admit that there are a lot of majority or white male associates who get caught up in the forget this and leave. But you have to measure, in Vita's analogy, you have to measure what percentage of minority associates actually get the life jacket experience. Because it's only a sliver of the associates in general that get it, maybe some percentage. But out of that percentage, how many are women? Out of that percentage, do you have any that are minority that happen to get that experience? Because the life jacket are the champions.
And the life jacket is more often than not being thrown to people who most reflect that majority culture. And I think that's one of the reasons why, especially when you look at women of color, they really get the life jacket thrown to them least often. And that's reflected in the fact why 75% leave their first law firm within the first 5 years of practice. They get out of that pool and say, this is really not for me. And that's because if you think about the majority being straight white males, women of color are about as far away, perception-wise, from matching that demographic. They mismatch on gender, they mismatch on race, ethnicity, and for those who may be LGBT, they mismatch yet again. So, I think these are some of the challenges that organizations have to face, and one of the reasons why they need really good, strong diversity programs that will reverse some of the impact of that natural in-group favoritism, because it happens everywhere.
Mr. Tucker, you mentioned earlier the issue of the questionnaires and what DuPont does with the questionnaires, the diversity questionnaires that they get back from their law firms. As the chair of the diversity committee at Nelson Mullins, I'm involved in responding to those questionnaires, and we put a lot of work and thought into them, as I'm sure other law firms do as well. But I always wondered, what happens with those questionnaires? Do they go into a file? Is there a committee of people at the corporation that are actually looking at these responses and comparing them to the responses that are coming into the other law firms? How meaningful are they, and what happens to them once they get to DuPont?
Very briefly, they're very meaningful. They're reviewed very thoroughly. We have about 45 or so firms, so we don't interview every firm every year. So every couple of years, a firm is getting interviewed, and it'll be discussed. Obviously, any red flags that come up will be addressed in off years. But We have a person who is responsible. The title changes, so I think they're the manager of law firm partnering or something like that now, who manages our firms and does fee negotiations every year and decides who, help with a group of leadership, decides who stays, who goes, do we add a firm, all those sorts of things, and manages the relationship. But as far as so that person will review them. There's 50 different ways probably that the data is sort of culled and measured and used in presentations. When the Women's Network does their meetings, they tend to pull the data and put up presentations for the firms. We've done it with the Minority Council Network for a number of years, where we'll pull the data and we'll show how you're doing at our primary law firm meeting, where our leadership, the engagement partners from each firm come. They'll share it. They may not do it individually. Obviously, we don't want to put everyone's numbers up for others to see, but collectively, you'll see how firms are doing. And then individually, you'll talk to the firms about any issues that come up. So you should take your time, those of you in law firms and like yourself, and put the effort in, because that's going to be part of the measuring process. It varies company to company as to how much the stock they put in it, but it certainly is looked at.
I want to just talk for a minute about the types of cases and how diversity is taken into account by corporate counsel in dealing with different types of cases. Ms. Parker, I'm sure you have outside law firms that handle, for example, foreclosures on behalf of the bank, and those typically are not bet the company cases. And you may actually be doing very well in locating and utilizing law firms, smaller law firms that do have a diverse pool of lawyers. But Mr. Tuckett, when you get a bet the company case, and you need to choose a law firm to handle that case, how important is diversity in the mix? Is it still there? Because when I'm in a courtroom looking across a sea of lawyers in these huge bet the company cases, I have to say, I very rarely see a diverse face in that courtroom. They're almost all white, almost all male, almost all in gray suits, white shirts, and spotted ties, and that's it. And it just seems to me that when the company really has a lot at stake, sometimes diversity goes out the window. Is that your perception as well?
Just from DuPont or just companies in general?
Well, I don't want to put DuPont on the hot seat here, but just, and maybe Ms. Richardson could help with this answer, sort of from the 30,000-foot level, but is that happening out there to your knowledge?
I think that if you're not doing the work of diversity as a corporation all along, you don't wait for the bet the company case to decide to do something about diversity. Your firms that know your company, we have a group of firms that most of them have been with us probably. When did we redo that? Jackie, do you remember when they did the convergence process? Was it 02? Or was it before, like 97, 02, somewhere? 92, I'm sorry, way beyond what I'm thinking, 92. We're talking 20 years now. And a lot of those firms have been with us, and a lot of those folks have been with us somewhere in that 20-year range, have developed. They know our company. And we're going to go most of the time with a firm that knows our company as well as has the depth and knows the courts. And so we work with them all along, and we've been working with them for years on making sure they're committed to diversity, which is why they're on the list and stayed on the list. So we think that out of that, we're going to see a fair number of our cases that are staffed with diverse lawyers. As a science company, almost every case we have is a class action, so it ends up becoming, except for your one-off tort cases and employment cases, any of them could bet the company at any minute. So we have our panel of lawyers, and in many jurisdictions we have very diverse teams. Some may or may not be, depending on how senior we need on a case. But so I think, generally speaking, we build our diversity into our process, so hopefully we won't run into having a panel of just all white male trial lawyers that we call on when it's time for a case. I know friends of mine a couple in this room, frankly, who have handled things for us that are large and major cases, who were diverse lawyers, women and minority lawyers.
I would say, in general, when it comes to bet the company cases, companies aren't going to experience them very often, hopefully.
Yeah.
You know, if they're betting a company every year, then at some point the company's going to lose and lose big time. So nobody wants to find themselves in that situation. But I would say that, you know, if I look at reports on bet the company cases when they are doing their post-mortem on what happened or what could have been done better, and they publish photos of who's been a part of it, oftentimes I'll admit I don't see a diverse group. It depends upon the issue. Certainly if you're, I don't know, and I actually can share, because they've been so public with it, with Altria, which is involved in tobacco litigation. When they have bet the company cases, you know, I attended one of their law department assessments or meetings with their outside counsel, and they freely shared that for their biggest bet the company case, they went in with the most diverse team they've ever had, and they won. So, you know, it depends upon the issue, how you're going to think about who you want representing you at the trial table. But certainly in the financial sector, probably bet the company cases aren't going to have a lot of diverse faces. And I think that it's the effect of having had an exclusive club at the senior levels for so long in certain areas of law. And because certain areas of law have not done a good job bringing along more diverse groups. And so when it comes time to bet the company and you look at people who've done this type of case before and had these types of experiences, well, if in, you know, the majority of firms people are being screened out before they get to that level, you don't have the pool to choose from. So I can't say that I fault the companies about that, because, you know, they can only choose who has been developed in those ways. And I also think that law firms' marketing departments could probably do a much better job promoting the expertise of diverse counsel to let it be wider known, you know, who has the ability with these bet the company cases. Because if general counsel were perhaps better informed that way, then perhaps they would be able to make different decisions to the extent people have bet the company litigators or bet the company securities counsel, or, you know, I don't know what else might be bet the company, but to the extent they have those attorneys, then I think they should do a good job promoting them.
Ms. Parker, does TD Bank monitor at all or weigh in at all on whether the diverse attorneys in the outside law firms are getting appropriate credit for the work they do on behalf of the bank? Or is that pretty much left up to the law firm?
I don't think it, because I think we've been doing this for about 2 years now. We're not at the point of looking into that credits check. Mm-hmm. I know that in terms, I've been advised by attorneys I work with about how to call and who to call in terms of getting appropriate credit provided at that firm level. But I don't know that we actually have a checking place that we go to. In other words, going back to the firm, I suppose, and checking on our side of it what actually happened.
Mr. Tuckett?
We don't get involved, as far as I know, maybe on some individual matters, maybe, I don't know, but I'm not aware of anything where DuPont Legal has gotten involved with a firm to decide credit in terms of internally. We obviously can decide who to call at that firm, and we also probably have some weigh-in on engagement partner and account manager decisions. I'm not saying we decide, we don't decide those things. But if there's a change that's being made for one reason or another, certainly the firm will come to us and talk about who should manage the account, and we still leave it up to them. There are some companies that I'm aware of, and I know Vita's well aware of them, who make those decisions for their firms. And so there's two different models. We just happen to fall into the model where the firm still makes their own decisions about credit and management of the account. There's a lot of discussion going on, though, about in the industry about whether that's which approach is the better approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, from a law firm's perspective, it's all about the business. And from the perspective of the lawyers who work in law firms, it's all about being in a position to generate those numbers so that you can make partner. Ms. Richardson, do you think that corporate counsel could be doing more to ensure that, for example, the diverse attorneys who are brought in to make a pitch and get the business are given appropriate credit within the law firm structure, whether the emphasis in that firm is on originations or whether it's on collections or hours or whatever the standards are, that those lawyers are actually getting that credit so that they're advancing in the law firm, and securing their position in the law firm for the future.
Yeah, I think that definitely it is a recommended practice for corporations to basically follow the money. If people come in and are a part of influencing you to go with that firm, then it seems to me the money ought to flow to them. And also, there should be a continuing check to make sure that the people who sit down and are a part of the pitch are actually billing to the account, once you start getting invoiced for work that the firm is doing. And we all know that the billable hour is so all-important in terms of people and their compensation in firms. So you want to, I guess, have a check on it, in my opinion, at 2 points. One, you should be vocal about the fact that the business was provided based upon the strength of the team that pitched. And secondly, that you want that strong team to actually be adding value to the corporation through the representation.
We're hearing reports that the number of diverse individuals applying for law school has gone down with the downturn in the economy. There's less money for scholarships available, for grants and whatnot, both private and public. That poses a real problem, I think, for the future of law firms in recruiting and retaining diverse talent. Have you thought at all about that, looking into the future, what you can do to deal with what will likely be an even smaller pool of good, diverse talent in the legal profession?
So I think on our side at the bank, we've certainly talked about the profession generally, and as I mentioned, going through acquisitions. And actually, I didn't even start to talk about, when you have an acquisition, what that does to a firm that's actually very important to one organization and maybe not even used by another, and which one wins. So that changes business as well. But I think in terms of what we have talked about is actually just in terms of cost, and frankly, it's cheaper to think about having summer interns and paying for that rather than paying for a contract lawyer for X number of months. Nothing's final, but we're certainly open to that because we're thinking, and certainly in my perspective, I know the opportunities that were created for me just because I worked at a bank before I went to law school, and just that experience. To me, I would hope that a firm realizing that, wow, you had an associate from TD Bank and they were interviewing at a firm, that should raise to you a flag that we probably were pretty impressed with their work and they did great things, and look at their resume and all the things they accomplished, and maybe we'll work with that firm for it. So we're thinking in terms of that aspect of the pipeline. In terms of hiring, I think it's hard to say right now. Again, we're just going through the acquisition model and hopefully getting to the point where we hire again in terms of where people might be coming from. One of the challenges, and I can't speak for many corporations, but I certainly know in my world that I do wish we had more time for mentoring and did more mentoring. A lot of that for corporations seems to be established on the law firm side, so by the time you hit the corporation, you really hit the ground running. There's nobody. I mean, when I think about some wonderful people I worked at firms who, thank goodness, took care of me and prepared me for that environment, you just come in, it's your project, you're with the executive, you're making the decisions, you're deciding how to answer the responses, you're actually able to admit, I do not know, but I will find the answer. And so there really isn't that opportunity for newer people coming out of school to walk into that environment. So for us, it's really hoping that we can get people who are talented from government and, again, talented from the law firm side to come in.
Yeah, I'm certainly not an expert about, law schools or why people or diverse candidates are choosing not to apply, but I'm going to guess that it has something to do with the economics of going to law school. Certainly, I've had a great legal career, But I'm thinking that if I were making that decision today, I don't know that I'd view law school as a really good bargain for my money. Law school's tuition has become ridiculously expensive. So expensive that most people, when they get out of school, if they don't land, a job at an AmLaw 200 law firm, they're going to be very much reversed in terms of accepting a job that pays less than the amount they've had to borrow. That out of whackness, has just increased over time, and I think I believe that law schools should be looking at how to deliver more value so that when students come out of school, they come out with a useful skill. And law school just doesn't provide a useful, it trains you to think, it trains you to research, but in this economy, no one's paying anybody. Well, they'll pay you to think, but you have to have some training in order to really add value, because people aren't paying for legal theories. And I think that if law schools adapt to be, less theoretical and train people with more practical skills, because one of the things that I've observed and felt really sad about is I've watched the number of students who come out, there aren't jobs in firms, the government's cutting back. You have some of the most educated people in our nation who are sitting idle. And some of them are trying to hang out their shingle with absolutely no experience and trying to represent people just so they can make a living enough to pay off their astronomical student debt. So, I'm actually glad to hear about, the deans and their councils on diversity, because it's not just a diversity issue, but there are fewer diverse applicants who are going to be able to afford a law school education. And I'd hate to see law become a profession solely of the elite. So you get to go to law school because, in your family you had lawyers and they can help you get in and then help you pay for it. If that's what law becomes, then I think, it's going to be disappointing for our nation as a whole.
Mr. Tuckett, do you see a problem down the road with the pool of diverse candidates dwindling over time?
Yeah, I think it'll become a problem. I think the shorter term problem in the profession is that people can't find jobs. There's a lot of young lawyers, young minority lawyers and non-minority lawyers who are looking. So I think in the short term, we're not going to feel it right away because there's so many unemployed people. But longer term, yes, I don't know that I would. I echo, as soon as you said it, it was exactly what I was thinking. I don't think I would be going to law school right now. I know too many unemployed lawyers who have honors graduates, and their firms just couldn't hire everybody, and they're hanging out of shingle. And I'm scared. I'm a 15 years of my career, and I'm scared to hang out of shingle. And I have friends who are 2 years out of law school in Philly who have shingles hang out. And they call me all the time and we talk, and I don't know how they do it, but they're doing it. But there's going to be a shortage. I can't see it yet because we have so many classes of lawyers that are unemployed. I think we'll start to see it in a couple of years because, the firms and companies firms will probably be more enamored with the new graduates. And this group in the middle are going to be kind of lost. I don't know whether we're going to reach back and get them or not. They're not going to have the experience of a third year, but they're going to be 3 years out of school. It's kind of, it's very scary right now for a lot of people. So I think a lot of people are shying away from even going at all. So we'll see how it pans out.
And if I could add, too, that, at least for myself, I know I can remember that moment when I felt encouraged to go to law school, and maybe that is true for many of you. But for myself, my parents didn't really, we had no legal background. My mom actually was a secretary to somebody who worked with a lawyer, and so she saw things come back and forth from the legal department. And so I worry, when I myself worry, like you also do, about, and I myself, again, went through this economic downturn and felt it very painfully. If we can't encourage people at that level, economic disparity exists clearly across our country. And then when you think about the diversity in general, of course, all these issues as well just get compounded on top of each other. But I mean, it's so critical to me, the pipeline aspect of it, more than ever before. And granted, that wasn't even a conversation item to me. But I definitely remember being on a train and running into a lawyer who happened to do international law and who said, "Oh, you can do it at the age of 16." And I thought, really? What does that mean? And so, we need that so much to be able to go out there and support that for not only law students, people thinking about law, but even just, honestly, I can't say it's not young enough to talk to my daughter at preschool age about what it means to be a lawyer. As I saw her grow, and I realized that she looked to almost everybody she heard what they did, and that's what she wanted to do. And so if it was a teacher, she wanted to be a teacher. And she saw someone who did art, she wanted to be an artist. And I was like, okay, and so I just think it's the same type of thing.
Can I put a plug in for MCCA? You've got the Lloyd Johnson scholarships,
Yeah.
right? MCCA, so there's other groups that do it too, but MCCA is most prominent, and a lot of the firms in the room have been involved, where you have fellows that are selected by MCCA, and the firms and companies, I know we've done it as well, sponsor fellows. And our fellow from DuPont graduated a couple years ago, and he's now at the SEC. He was already an SEC employee. He ended up going back as a lawyer. And I know McGuire and others have a fellow. And I would encourage all of the firms and companies to really seriously consider being a sponsor of fellows with MCCA, because the stories they tell. He was at our conference, and Monica, you might remember, Tariq was there, and he has his family, and he went back to law school, and he was very touched. It touched everybody. He couldn't even hold his emotions back, because he knew. He said, I wouldn't have been able to afford it. And when we think about that, we've got to now, as a community, a legal community, the next step for us when we talk about putting our money where our mouth is if the law school's budgets don't allow them to lower their prices, which hopefully maybe will happen one day, then we've got to figure out how do we help them find the values, but also how do we help them pay for it. And it used to be that the model paid for itself. If you got them in the firm, they were going to pay their loans off. But nowadays, it's just not really a feasible economic decision. So we got all these kids in high school, in college, and our pipeline programs are getting them all jazzed about the law. And, it's $40 a year? Wow. And they decide they want to be an IT professional because they pay better. And they can get a degree, they can get a certification instead of a degree after college. So that's going to be our challenge, is to help find ways to help the next generation of minority and women lawyers find the money.
See, we're coming up on our allotted time slot, but I wanted to ask anyone in the audience if you had any questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for taking the time to speak with us. If I can speak candidly, I think that after the economic downturn, most of us would agree that the color of diversity is green. I think that one of the common complaints that I often hear, and I know it's a challenge that I faced coming from a working class background, my mom was not educated, I didn't have the benefit of a lawyer or a doctor looking over my writing all those many years in elementary and high school. But if the common complaint is that many minorities, diverse persons, don't possess the requisite skill sets, do you think that by using this stick and somehow pressuring firms to get to understand that they need to take that extra measure to ensure that those folks who are starting at a distinct disadvantage, present company included, that they need to go that extra measure to help to ensure that those folks do acquire the requisite skill sets and that thereby are able to ascend through the ranks of these organizations?
I'm going to say amen. Yes, definitely do. I think that's why, we all agree that it's important to be, one, vocal about diversity, to influence the people who appear in front of you for a pitch or who are assigned to your team to work on your matters. And then, just as you said, the color of diversity has now become green. So you need to follow the money, make sure that people are getting a share of the origination credit or whatever it's called at that firm, and that they continue to be enriched by the engagement by being able to work on the matter. And it enriches them in a couple of ways. It enriches them in terms of money, but it also enriches them in terms of developing marketable skills. skills that will allow them to progress and, move up the firm ladder or take their skills and be able to move and do well in corporations or in other workplace settings.
Imagine a world where every law firm and every corporate legal department, even though we don't hire at a school, but still we can put ourselves in this imaginary world I'm about to paint, where in addition to our high school street law programs and in addition to our whatever we're doing in the law schools and helping come alongside some law students in resume writing and interview skills classes that a lot of our companies and firms are doing and job fairs that we put on and all those things. Imagine a world where every firm, every 3 to 5 years, selected a small group of students, and out of that small group of students picked one that they were going to walk through college, walk through law school, and walk into either their firm or some other firm or company and really make sure, to your point, that they had that skill set. Every single firm of a certain size, even from the 50, maybe 100 or 200 lawyers or bigger, and every corporate legal department of a certain level of a corporation. In that world that I imagine, where everybody does it, I know it's not realistic, but I think it ought to be a requirement, and I've said this publicly too, and it's me, it's not DuPont saying this, so I take my badge off for a minute, I guess, that I think every firm that we deem serious about diversity ought to have a pipeline project. Doesn't have to be the one that I just painted, because that's a lot to ask. That's a lot to ask. But there are firms that are doing similar things like that, who come alongside college students, and I can tell you more about them offline if you want to hear some of them, and really sort of see them through learning the basics in the process. If we really had that level of commitment as an industry, and not just relied on the fact that so many people love law that they rush to law school, we don't have to do much work to find talent. If we really had to seed that talent, like some other industries might have to, imagine that world where we could say, okay, we could exponentially raise the number of women, number of minorities coming in with that right skill set who don't make the mistakes out of the box. So I think that what I would say to what you said is that the firms and companies that are serious ought to start coming alongside of students earlier on and making a longer-term investment. I'm looking at one of my friends who has a firm who does that, make a longer-term investment in students before law school even, to make sure that they're getting what they need. So, I get excited when I go to my high school and these kids are telling me, I was teaching unemployment law, and one of them said, I said quid pro quo, and I was about to say what it meant. They said, oh, we know what that means. They told me what it meant. And I happily tell them, you guys think I'm great? I didn't know what a tort was. I was 22. Let alone quid pro quo, res ipsa loquitur, all of that. I didn't know any of that. They know it because they're being taught that. So if you can see that small example in high school, you can really teach a college student, for example, who has all the promise in the world, how to really maneuver in a corporate setting or a law office earlier on, if you really can make that investment. You can't do it for a large class, but you can do it for individuals. And I think we could start encouraging people to take on the fellows that I talked about earlier with MCCA, as well as your own programs where you might not even give scholarships, but you might give internships or whatever you might do can really help. Whatever we can do, I keep saying we can do to really bring students along earlier so that we're starting to give those intangible skills. Because I was like you. My dad was a postal worker. My mom was a homemaker with 5 kids. And somehow we survived with one income. I couldn't imagine that today. But, we didn't survive well, but we survived. And financial aid was plentiful when I went to college, so I was somehow able not to, have to run out of Georgetown. So I did okay, but it's a whole other world right now.
Yes, the question is for Mr. Tucker and DuPont. How much of your diversity effort is directed at firms with the majority of African American partners and the majority of women partners?
Very good question. We have we have a list. We have a group of approved law firms who are our primary law firms, and then we have a group of firms that we've begun working with for many years now, who are minority and women-owned law firms. Over the years, our program has really become more robust with the help of NAMWOLF and other organizations that you may be familiar with, the National Association of Minority and Women-Owned Law Firms. And now with the Inclusion Initiative, DuPont was one of the initial signatories, along with many, Accenture and many other companies, to commit to putting a certain amount of money every year with minority and women-owned law firms. We have candidly, still have our own internal challenges on making sure that all 120 lawyers in our department and whatever subset of that 120 that actually use outside counsel, that they find opportunities to place not just litigation, not just an employment small matter, but significant matters and transactions and IP and other things with those firms. So we have a lot of work that's still underway internally, to be very candid. But I'm happy to say that we've got a great number of firms, from litigation boutiques to larger firms, like a couple of firms, multi-city firms that happen to still be minority and women-owned firms. And even have one firm that I believe, no, let me not say that may be wrong. I think one of them is a PLF too. But so there is an effort. As you can see, there's a tension though when you talk to minority lawyers at majority firms between how much love does each side get, because the minority lawyers are coming to us wanting some support, and then you have the minority firms, and there's no fighting, and I'm not suggesting there's bitterness. I'm just saying there's a tension because there's always the ask from our firms to try to divert more money to them, and we have a minority engagement partner at one firm, and then you give money to minority firms. So there's a tension that's got to just be honestly put on the table. But at the same time, we've been able to, Tom successfully has been able to maneuver that tension and create the Minority and Women-Owned Firm program. And I believe this year, NAMWOLF just announced that the Inclusion Initiative hit their number. It was 30?
It was 35 million, but they went into 40-some.
Wow.
And do you know the second part of it?
No, I don't.
They announced that their new target for this year is 70 million.
Wow.
70
I
million.
heard it went up. I didn't know that high.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. So, that part of that is what, obviously this is not a DuPont thing. This is there are probably a dozen or more corporations involved in that, and we're just one. So that's something that we can report about. I believe somebody.
Yes.
We talked about the diversity initiatives that are, or lack thereof, that are directed towards non-traditional students. I'm currently an evening law student here at Catholic, and I've noticed that a lot of the fellowships and some of the other initiatives that are offered to the full-time day students aren't necessarily offered to evening students that are working in just our non-traditional students.
No, well, I'll take that on because MCCA's program is only available to full-time students. And the reason for that is the investment that we're making in terms of their availability. We have to have students who are not necessarily encumbered by their work responsibilities in order to accept some of the job opportunities that we find for them. So that's the reason why our program is limited to students who have made a full-time commitment to school. And also it's because when we look at our scholarship is for outstanding students, but it's also for students who have a need base. And if someone has the income from a job, admittedly you're stretched, but you're in a much better position than a student who has no other source of income and support. And it's for that reason that we specifically focus on full-time students only. And we'd love to have a world where we could fund everybody, but we don't have that large a pool of funds, so we had to make a difficult choice and chose to make it full-time only.
I'm told we're out of time, so we're going to have to wrap this panel up. I just did a 10-minute break.
Yeah, 10-minute break. If everyone could come back here around 10:50, that would be great.
Thank you.